Dakota Nolan didn't expect to be arguing with a stranger outside a grocery store in downtown Chicago at 9 in the morning, but here she was, heels clicking on the pavement, voice sharp, and patience fraying. "I said no, that's enough," she snapped, stepping back from the man in the wrinkled button-down who just spilled his coffee across the hood of her black Mercedes. "You don't get to insult me because you weren't watching where you were going. Lady, it's a car." "Don't act like I just kicked your dog," the man barked, arms flailing. "And you're the one who parked like you own the place." Dakota's blood boiled. She'd had 3 meetings canceled this morning, her assistant quit last week, and this idiot was now yelling at her in front of a growing crowd. She opened her mouth to respond, but someone beat her to it. "Back off. She's clearly not the one at fault here." The voice was low, steady, and firm. Dakota turned. A man stood between her and the angry stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a faded navy hoodie, jeans that looked like they'd seen better years, and a little girl clutching his hand. His jaw was tight, his eyes locked on the man still waving his coffee cup. The stranger scoffed. "What, you her bodyguard?" "No," the man replied calmly, "just someone who doesn't like watching a woman get screamed at in a parking lot." Dakota blinked. The stranger grumbled and stomped off, muttering under his breath. The moment he disappeared into the store, the tension snapped. She let out a breath. "Thank you," she said, brushing her hair out of her face. "That guy was a jerk," the man said. "You okay?" "I'm fine, just annoyed." She looked down at the little girl beside him. Her curly dark hair was tied in a lopsided ponytail, and she was clutching a small stuffed dinosaur. She looked up at Dakota like she was trying to figure her out. "I'm Dakota," she said softly, crouching a little. "What's your name?" The girl gave a shy smile. "Penny." "Hi, Penny." "I love your dinosaur." She named him Pickles, the man added, finally cracking a small smile. "I'm Kade Zimmerman." She stood straight again. "Thanks for stepping in." "No problem, that guy was a disaster." "You looked like you were about to throw your purse at him." "I was considering it," she said, her lips tugging into a reluctant grin. Kade shifted slightly and looked at her car. "That's a nice ride." She paused. "Yeah, it gets me where I need to go." He glanced down at Penny. "We should get going. Gotta pick up some groceries before she decides cereal for dinner's a new tradition." Dakota hesitated. "Wait, can I buy you both breakfast? As a thank you?" Kade looked surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said, "but I want to." He glanced at Penny, who nodded enthusiastically like she'd just won the lottery. "Can we get pancakes?" Dakota laughed. "Definitely." They ended up at a cozy diner across the street, the kind with chipped mugs and red leather booths. Penny immediately stole Dakota's attention, telling her all about her kindergarten class and how Pickles once got lost under the couch for a whole day. Kade sipped his coffee quietly, watching them. "So," Dakota said, "do you always rescue women from parking lot disasters?" "Only on Wednesdays," he said dryly. "You got lucky," she smiled. "What do you do, Kade?" "I'm a mechanic, was anyway, got laid off a few months ago. Been picking up jobs here and there. Right now, I'm doing delivery for a catering company." Dakota's stomach twisted a little. He said it without shame, but she could hear the strain behind the words. "And Penny's mom?" she asked gently. He looked at his daughter, who was now focused on her pancake like it was the best thing she'd ever seen. "She left when Penny was 2. Haven't seen her since." Dakota's chest tightened. I'm sorry," he shrugged. "It's been just us for a while. We manage." She looked at him, really looked. There was something about him that didn't match the worn clothes and tired eyes. He had this quiet strength, like he'd been knocked down a few times but still stood tall. She admired that. And for the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about board meetings or stock reports or the endless pressure of being one of the youngest CEOs in the city. She was just present. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you do?" "I work in business," she said quickly, brushing it off. "It's boring," he raised an eyebrow. "You boring? Doubt it." She laughed and looked down at her plate, suddenly feeling 16 again. It was ridiculous. She didn't know this man, he didn't know her, but it felt like she'd known him for years. When the check came, Dakota reached for it, but Kade beat her to it. "I said I'd treat," she protested. He pulled out a few crumpled bills. "You did, but I've got this." "Kade, it's just pancakes," he said. "Let me do this." She looked at him, confused and touched. Most men she met tried to impress her. Kade didn't even know who she was. He was just kind. As they walked out, Penny tugged on Dakota's hand. "Can you come to the park with us?" Kade looked embarrassed. "Penny, I'd love to," Dakota said before he could finish. They ended up at a small park nearby. Penny ran ahead, giggling, while Dakota and Kade sat on a bench watching her. "I don't usually do this," he said after a long silence. "Have breakfast with random women. Yeah, and definitely not parks after." She turned to him. "I don't either." They looked at each other and something passed between them. "You're different," he said finally. She smiled. "So are you." He leaned back, sighing. "I don't know what this is. But I'm glad it happened." "Me too." Penny came running back with a flower in her hand and plopped it into Dakota's lap. "It's for you," she said proudly, "because you're pretty." Dakota laughed, tears stinging her eyes. "Thank you, Penny. That's the nicest thing anyone's said to me all week." Kade watched her, something shifting in his expression, something deeper, and Dakota felt it too. Something had started, and she didn't want it to end. The wind had picked up by the time Dakota returned to her car. A small paper flower Penny had made for her tucked into her coat pocket. She sat behind the wheel longer than she meant to, fingers resting on the steering wheel, mind still lingering on the way Kade had looked at her just before they parted. Not like a man trying to impress, not like someone who wanted anything from her, just a quiet, steady gaze that left her unsteady. She didn't even know what had possessed her to cancel her next meeting, but for once, it had felt right. Back at her office, a sleek glass monolith downtown, her assistant for the day, hired through a temp agency, met her with a stack of folders and a look of mild panic. "There's a call from the Tokyo investors moved up to this afternoon," he said. "Also, the development team needs sign-off on the budget proposal, and your father called." Her spine stiffened. "Did he say what he wanted?" "No, just that it was urgent." She took the folders, walking briskly toward her office. "Tell the investors I'll call them in 20. And find me the latest numbers on the Redstone acquisition." Once inside her office, she closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. Her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows stared back, polished, poised, completely at odds with the woman who'd laughed with a little girl over pancakes 2 hours ago. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it and sat at her desk, pulling open a drawer. Beneath a pile of reports, her fingers brushed against a crumpled napkin. Penny had doodled a dinosaur on it, just before they left the diner. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her wallet. That evening, while her driver took her home, she watched the city blur past in a haze of lights and steel. Something about today had shifted her axis. She didn't know what to do with that. The next morning, she was pouring coffee in her penthouse kitchen when her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go, but something nudged her. "Hello?" A pause then. Hey, it's Kade from yesterday." She straightened. "I remember." He cleared his throat. "Hope this isn't weird. Penny wanted to invite you to her school's spring fair tomorrow. She made me promise I'd ask." Dakota blinked. "A fair?" "Yeah, it's nothing fancy, just booths, games. She's in this little play thing. She said you'd probably be too busy, but she wanted to try." Dakota glanced at her schedule lying open on the counter, meetings from dawn to dusk. "But nothing that couldn't be shifted." "I'd love to come," she said. There was a beat of silence. "Really?" "Yes, tell her I wouldn't miss it." The next afternoon, she stood in a crowd of parents and kids on a school lawn, the scent of popcorn and cotton candy hanging in the air. She wore jeans and a leather jacket, her hair pulled back, no trace of the corporate world clinging to her. Kade spotted her before she saw him. He waved, Penny at his side, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "You came," Penny said, running up to her. "Of course I did." "I brought something for Pickles, too," she said, pulling a little plastic dinosaur keychain from her pocket. Penny squealed and hugged her. Kade watched, something unreadable in his eyes. "You clean up nice," he said quietly. She nudged him. "You say that like I was a mess before. You weren't, just different." They wandered the fair together, Penny darting ahead to try every game. Dakota bought her a balloon shaped like a unicorn, and Kade won her a stuffed frog by knocking down a pyramid of cans. "She's happy here," Dakota said as they watched Penny climb into the bounce house. "Yeah," he replied. "I try to give her a good life, even if it's not always easy." Dakota turned to him. She's lucky to have you. He looked down at the grass. I worry I'll screw it up. Some days I don't know if I'm doing it right. You're showing up. That counts for more than you think. They sat on a bench near the playground as the sun dipped low. Penny was still playing, her laugh rising above the chatter. After a long pause, Kade said, I looked you up. Dakota's breath caught. Oh, you said you worked in business. You didn't mention you run it. She didn't answer right away. I didn't want that to be the first thing you knew about me, she said finally. Most people change when they find out. I didn't. She looked at him, startled. I mean, yeah, it surprised me, but it doesn't change the fact that you made time for a 6-year-old's pancake breakfast. Or that you showed up today when you didn't have to. I wasn't sure how you'd take it, she admitted. I've had people treat me like a bank account more than a person. I'm not interested in your bank account, he said. I'm interested in you, her heart thudded. Penny ran back to them, her cheeks pink. Did you see me in the play? You were the best flower I've ever seen, Dakota said. Penny beamed and crawled into Kade's lap, already half asleep. He glanced at Dakota. Want to walk us to the car? They walked slowly, the evening chill settling in. At his old sedan, he paused. She'd be thrilled if you came by sometime, even if it's just to color. Dakota smiled. I'd like that. Good, he said, and before she could think too hard, he leaned in and kissed her soft and sure, like he'd been waiting to do it since the moment they met. When they parted, she was breathless. Good night, Dakota. She watched them drive away, her fingers brushing her lips. Something was happening, and this time she didn't want to run from it. Dakota adjusted the strap of her bag as she stood on the edge of the cracked sidewalk, her heels clicking softly as she waited for Kade to open the garage door. The place was tucked behind a row of closed shops, the kind of building most people wouldn't give a second glance. But she'd asked to see where he worked now, where he'd managed to pick up a part-time gig fixing up delivery vans after hours, and he hadn't hesitated to invite her. He tugged the door open with both hands, the metal creaking up to reveal a dimly lit workspace dotted with tools and engine parts. A faded Cubs poster hung crooked behind a cluttered desk, and a portable radio hummed quietly in the corner. There's not much to see, he said, wiping his hands on a rag, but it pays enough to keep the lights on. I wanted to see it anyway, she said, stepping inside. You mentioned you were working on a rebuild, he gestured toward the back. Old Chevy. Transmission's a mess, but the body's solid. Guy who owns it wants to use it for food deliveries. I told him it might take a few weeks, but he's in no rush. She crouched beside the vehicle, eyes scanning the chassis with surprising focus. I used to help my uncle fix his Jeep in high school. Mostly handing him wrenches and nodding like I understood. He leaned against the work table, watching her with a curious expression. Didn't peg you for the grease under your nails type. You'd be surprised what I used to do before boardrooms and press briefings. She stood and brushed her hands together. I liked fixing things. There's something comforting about putting broken pieces back together. He studied her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. So why give it up? She hesitated. Because I was good at numbers, and my father made sure I knew that's where I'd stay useful. Kade's brow furrowed. He pushed you into it. He didn't have to. He just kept reminding me what I'd lose if I didn't succeed. She exhaled slowly. It's funny. Everyone thinks success comes with freedom, but for me, it was a cage. He took a step closer. You don't seem like someone who stays caged for long. Maybe not anymore, she said, her voice quieter. Being around you and Penny, it's made me start asking questions I've been avoiding. He reached over to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers gentle. Like what? Like whether it's possible to build a life worth living without sacrificing everything that makes you human. The silence hung between them, charged and heavy. Then he said, You ever wonder what it'd be like to disappear for a while? No phones, no meetings, just peace. She met his eyes. Every day. Then come with us this weekend, he said suddenly. I was going to take Penny to this cabin outside Lake Geneva. My friend owns it. It's nothing fancy, but she's been asking to go back for weeks. Dakota blinked. You sure? She'd love it. So would I, she gave a slow nod. All right, I'll rearrange things. He smiled, not the practiced kind she saw in business meetings, but something warmer. We'll leave Friday night, I'll drive. Friday evening came fast. Dakota packed light, trading her designer wardrobe for rolled-up sleeves and old sneakers. Her driver dropped her off where Kade and Penny waited by the curb, bags already loaded in his car. Penny waved from the backseat. "I saved you the front." The drive was long but easy. Penny fell asleep halfway through with Pickles resting on her lap. Dakota watched the moonlit trees pass outside the window, the quiet between her and Kade filled with unspoken things. When they arrived, the cabin was modest wood paneled with a porch swing, and a fire pit out back, but it sat beneath a canopy of stars, the air crisp and clean. Kade carried Penny inside while Dakota grabbed the food cooler from the trunk. Inside, the fireplace crackled to life and blankets were tossed over the couch. Dakota changed into leggings and a sweatshirt, barefoot on the wooden floor as she helped Kade unpack the groceries. "You weren't lying," she said as she pulled out a carton of eggs. "This place is simple, but it's ours for the weekend," he said, placing a kettle on the stove. "No boardrooms here, just burnt marshmallows and bad card games." They stayed up late, sitting by the fire with mugs of tea. Penny had already curled up in bed, exhausted from the drive. "I don't know how you do it," Dakota said softly. "Work, parenting, holding it all together." "I mess up more than I get it right," he admitted, "but I keep trying because she needs me to." She looked into the flames. "I envy that in a way." He turned to her. "What, the chaos?" "No," she said. "The clarity. You know what matters. I've spent my whole life chasing things I thought I was supposed to want. I don't even know what I really want." He reached over, his hand covering hers. "Maybe this is where you figure it out." She met his eyes. "Maybe." The next morning, Penny dragged them outside to look for pine cones and skipped rocks across the lake. Dakota laughed more than she had in months, real laughter, not the kind that masked exhaustion. She helped cook breakfast on the old stove and spilled pancake batter on the counter. Kade didn't blink, just handed her a towel and kissed her temple like it was the most normal thing in the world. Later, they sat on the porch swing while Penny colored with chalk on the wooden deck. "I haven't felt like this in a long time," Dakota said, her voice low. "Like what?" "Like I could breathe." He reached for her hand. "Then stay a little longer." Dakota hesitated. "I'll have to go back eventually. But not today." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Not today." They sat there as the sun dipped behind the trees, the weight of the world momentarily forgotten. And for the first time in years, Dakota didn't feel like she was performing a version of herself. She just felt real. And seen. And safe. But deep down, she knew something was coming. Something that would test everything they'd built in this fragile, beautiful moment. Because the world she came from never stayed quiet for long. Kade turned the ignition key, but the engine only sputtered. He leaned forward, forehead against the steering wheel, while Dakota stood nearby, arms crossed, watching from the edge of the gravel driveway that curved through the woods. "I tightened the cables last night," he muttered, stepping out of the car. "Thought it'd hold until we got back." "I can call a car service," Dakota offered. "There's a company I use, they'll come out here." He shut the hood and shook his head. "It's Sunday. By the time they get here, we'll be chasing sunset." "I'll figure something out." Dakota glanced at the cabin behind them where Penny was inside watching a cartoon marathon with a bowl of cereal in her lap. "She can stay here with me while you work on it. It's warm inside and I don't mind." "You sure?" he asked, brushing dirt off his hands. "I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." He gave her a nod and walked back to the garage, toolbox in hand. Dakota watched him go, then turned back toward the porch, stepping carefully over a patch of icy moss. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth and Penny was curled into a blanket fort she'd made from couch cushions. "Is it broken?" Penny asked, peeking over the top of her cereal bowl. "Just a little tired," Dakota said, sitting beside her. "He'll fix it. I bet he will." "Daddy fixes everything." Dakota smiled and reached for a book from the nearby stack. "Want me to read to you?" Penny nodded, crawling over with Pickles tucked under her arm. An hour passed, then another. By the time Kade returned, covered in grease and looking exhausted, Penny had fallen asleep again, this time in Dakota's lap, one of her small hands wrapped around Dakota's fingers. He paused at the doorway, watching them in silence. "She was pretending to be a dragon," Dakota whispered. Then she passed out mid-roar. He chuckled quietly, leaning against the wall. "Starter's shot. I can replace it, but we'll be here another night." Dakota nodded. I don't mind. You never seem to. She looked at him carefully. You say that like it surprises you. He walked over and sat on the other end of the couch, keeping his voice low. It does. You show up again and again. You let her climb all over you, read her story after story, and you never once act like it's something you're tolerating. You just belong here. Dakota shifted Penny gently off her lap and onto a pillow. I don't think I've belonged anywhere in a long time. Kade leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You're not like anyone I've ever known. I could say the same. But you don't belong in this cabin, he said, not unkindly. You belong in a place with marble floors and people who bring you coffee without asking. Not here with a guy who's one missed paycheck away from losing his apartment. I'm not here because I pity you, she said firmly, and I don't care about marble floors. I care about how I feel when I'm sitting on this couch. He looked at her for a long time. And how do you feel? Like I'm finally choosing something for myself. Before he could answer, Dakota's phone buzzed from the kitchen counter. She walked over and glanced at the screen. Her father's name flashed across it. Kade stood, brushing his hands on his jeans. Take it. I'll check on the car again. She let the call ring out. When she turned back, he was gone. By the time evening fell, the cabin was bathed in golden light. Dakota stepped outside with a mug of tea, catching sight of Kade by the car again. She walked over, the cold air brushing her cheeks. Everything all right? She asked. Yeah, just thinking, you disappeared earlier. I didn't want to say something I'd regret. She waited. I've been trying to protect Penny from instability her whole life, he said. And then you show up, and I start imagining things I'm not sure I have the right to want. She stepped closer. Like what? Waking up next to someone who smiles at her the way you do. Someone who doesn't run when life gets messy. I'm not running, she said, but you could, and I wouldn't blame you. I don't have much to offer. Dakota reached up, resting her hand against his chest. You offered me something no one else has. A version of myself I forgot existed. He looked down at her hand, then back at her face. I'm still terrified. So am I. But I want this, he said. If you do, she nodded. I do. He leaned down, kissing her like he'd been waiting for confirmation. It was slow, grounded, filled with all the uncertainty and hope tangled between them. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested lightly against his. We'll figure it out, she whispered. The next morning, a mechanic from a nearby town arrived, an old friend of Kade's who owed him a favor. While he worked on the car, Dakota helped Kade and Penny pack up the cabin. It was quiet, but not the kind of silence that needed to be filled. It was comfortable. A rhythm had formed between them. As they drove back to the city, Penny sang softly in the back seat. Dakota's hand rested on Kade's thigh, and he glanced at her with a quiet smile that said everything. Back in Chicago, Kade carried Penny up the stairs of his walk-up apartment while Dakota followed behind. When he opened the door, she saw it fully for the first time, clean but sparse, modest but warm. Penny's drawings filled the fridge, and a plant drooped in the corner by the window. I have a meeting tomorrow, Dakota said after Penny was tucked in. But I'd like to come by after. You're always welcome. She looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. What's this? He asked. I bought this a few weeks ago. I didn't know why at the time. Now I do. He opened it and pulled out a card. It was a business card, but not hers. It was for a charter school in the neighborhood, one with a strong arts program and full scholarships available. She deserves more than the district can give her, Dakota said. And they're still accepting applications. Kade stared at the card. You looked into this for her? I didn't want to overstep, but I couldn't stop thinking about her drawings, her imagination. She needs a place that nurtures that. He swallowed hard. You didn't overstep. You don't have to decide now. I just wanted you to know it's an option. He set the card down and looked at her. You changed everything. She shook her head. You let me. He stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. That Friday, Dakota stood at the door of the small school beside Kade and Penny, watching as the little girl ran inside with her backpack bouncing behind her. Kade reached down and laced his fingers through Dakota's. I don't know what the future looks like, he said. Neither do I, she replied. But I know who I want in it. He squeezed her hand. Then let's build it. They stood there for a moment longer, watching Penny disappear into the bustling hallway of her new school, the morning sun casting long shadows behind them. And for the first time in both their lives, the path ahead felt wide open and completely theirs. The gala was a sea of glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos, the kind of event Dakota usually floated through with a practiced smile and a glass of champagne she rarely finished. Tonight, though, she felt different, lighter, grounded. She wasn't here to make deals or smooth over investor egos. She was here for Kade. He stood just inside the ballroom doors in a tailored navy suit she'd arranged to have fitted for him last week, something classic, understated, but devastatingly handsome. He looked equal parts uncomfortable and enthralled, his eyes scanning the twinkling chandeliers and marble pillars with open curiosity. "Tell me again why you brought me to this," he asked as she approached, her emerald silk gown trailing behind her like liquid light. "Because you've spent the last 3 weekends fixing other people's messes," she said. "And tonight, you get to see my world." He leaned in slightly, his voice lower. "I'd rather be at that cabin with you and Penny, burning marshmallows and watching old movies." "I know," she said, resting her hand on his arm, "but I wanted you beside me tonight." A hostess passed by with a tray of champagne and Kade hesitated before taking a glass. "Feels like everyone's staring," he muttered. "That's because they're trying to figure out who you are," she said with a faint smile. "And what have you told them?" "I haven't told them anything. Let them wonder." He glanced around the room. "Which one's the guy who keeps trying to buy your company?" Dakota subtly inclined her head toward a man in a charcoal suit across the floor, surrounded by board members. Kade tilted his head. "He looks like he's never changed a tire. He's offered twice what the company's worth. Thinks if he throws enough zeros at me, I'll cave." "And will you?" She turned to him fully. "Not a chance." They moved through the room together, stopping occasionally for brief greetings, Dakota firm and poised, Kade quiet but steady beside her. She introduced him to no one, and yet everyone noticed him. Not because he belonged to the world they moved in, but because he didn't, and he didn't try to pretend he did. After dinner, she led him out onto the rooftop terrace, the city skyline stretching wide and glittering beneath them. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted, leaning against the stone railing. "I wasn't either," he said, "but Penny insisted I take a picture with you in the dress." Dakota laughed softly. "She's already better at this than we are." He looked at her, serious now. "I've been thinking about something." She turned to face him. "I want to build a place," he said. "A real shop, not just a garage I borrow from friends, something permanent. I've found a location. It's small, but it's got potential." Her eyes lit up. "You're doing it." "I want Penny to see that we don't have to settle. If I keep waiting for everything to be perfect, I'll never start." She stepped closer. "What do you need?" "Support, patience, maybe someone who knows how to read contracts." She reached for his hand. "I can give you all of that." "I don't want your money, Dakota." "I know, that's why I want to help." He paused. "There's something else." She waited. "I talked to that school counselor," he said. "They said Penny tested into the advanced art program. She starts next month." Dakota's eyes shimmered. "Kade, she wouldn't be there without you," he said. "You saw her before anyone else did, including me. You gave her the foundation," she said. "I just helped shine a light." He took a slow breath, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, flat box. "I wasn't going to do this tonight, but I realized something watching you in that room. You never let anyone define you. And you never asked me to be anyone other than who I am." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring, a delicate design shaped like a winding vine with a single diamond in the center. Elegant, quiet, just like him. "I'm not promising a perfect life," he said. "But I can give you an honest one, and I want to do that with you." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and her hand trembled slightly as it settled into place. The door behind them opened, and a breeze followed as a few guests stepped onto the terrace. Kade lowered his voice. "This isn't really your kind of proposal, is it?" She shook her head. "It's better." They returned to the ballroom, her hand firmly in his. A few heads turned, whispers followed, but Dakota didn't care. She had nothing to prove. That night, they drove back to Kade's apartment, where Penny had fallen asleep on the couch with a blanket around her and a plate of cookies half-eaten beside her. Dakota scooped her up carefully and carried her to bed, brushing a curl from her forehead as she settled in. Kade watched from the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft. Later, they sat on the fire escape outside his bedroom, legs dangling over the edge as the city hummed beneath them. "You're not scared?" he asked. "I was," she said, "but not anymore." He turned to her. "What changed?" "I stopped trying to protect the version of myself I thought I had to be." She rested her head on his shoulder. "And I started choosing the version I wanted to become." They sat in silence for a long time. Spring turned to summer. The shop opened 2 months later, a modest corner lot Kade transformed with his own hands. Dakota helped him navigate the permits, the contracts, the banking. He insisted on painting the front sign himself, Zimmerman Auto and Restoration. Penny came by after school most days, sketchbook under her arm, curling up in the office behind the counter while her dad worked. Dakota visited every evening, her heels traded in for sneakers, her briefcase forgotten in the backseat of her car. One Saturday, Penny dragged them both to the park for a family picnic she'd organized, complete with paper crowns and juice boxes. Kade wore the crown all day, even when Dakota teased him about it. He didn't care, neither of them did. Their wedding was quiet. A garden ceremony in late fall, with Penny tossing handfuls of autumn leaves down the aisle in place of flower petals. Dakota wore a tea-length gown and boots, her hair loose around her shoulders. Kade stood beside her in a gray vest and a crooked tie Penny had picked out. When they kissed, there was no applause, just the wind, the rustle of leaves, and a small girl clapping loudly behind them, shouting, "Finally!" Later that night, they danced in the backyard under strings of warm lights, Penny asleep on a blanket nearby, Dakota's head resting against Kade's chest. "I used to think love had to be complicated," she said. "It doesn't," he replied. "Just honest." She looked up at him. "We really did this. Together." He kissed her again, long and slow, the kind of kiss that didn't need to be rushed, the kind that said, "We're not going anywhere." And they didn't. Not ever again.